Out with the old, in with the new grand old party. President Trump has all but cemented a new path forward on the national security front. He's broken with Republican hawks, fired top military officials, including the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General C.Q. Brown, and has even taken steps toward Russia on the world stage. Simply put, Trump has remodeled the GOP in his own image without much pushback. Joining us now to dive into the new national security model is Burgess Everett, a journalist at Semafor. Welcome to Rising.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you with us. So I think this is, a phenomenon that even people who don't follow politics super closely have now caught on to, that Trump has totally changed the foreign policy of the Republican Party, such that you can find people like Marco Rubio, his own Secretary of State, doing and saying things as recently as 2 years ago that are totally at odds with the things he does and says now as Trump's Secretary of State. Do you think this is actually a permanent shift, or if Trump were to somehow magically disappear, or this is his final term, he's done in 4 years, will the Republican Party reflexively transform back into the way it was in the preceding decades?
It feels pretty permanent to me, and I say that for a couple of reasons. One is Trump's heir apparent is J.D. Vance. I think he's probably even more of a reliable steward of this sort of non-interventionist, they don't like being called isolationists, non-interventionist way of thinking. He's obviously probably the most logical successor to Trump in 2028 when we get there. And then when you just look at the lineup of who is coming into Congress and who is leaving, the more traditional Republicans who would be called hawks, the John McCain wing of the party, who are kind of aligned with the George W. Bush way of thinking, they're on their way out. And the people, the youngest folks, the newest folks coming in the Senate and the House are far more aligned with Trump and J.D. Vance. You can even see it on the Senate Armed Service Committee, which is basically split between these more senior members who kind of came in before Trump, came into Congress or politics, and then folks who came in after Trump. So it feels like a permanent shift to me because Trump has worked hard behind the scenes to transform the party in these primaries and safe red states to get people that are simpatico with him from when he was in office to when he was out of office. And it feels like there's probably no turning back.
And, how is this impacting the electoral possibilities for the Republican Party? I think there is a sentiment among certain conservatives that the primary voters, the base, always kind of wanted a less interventionist foreign policy, was skeptical of foreign aid. Now, of course, there's exaggeration of what part of the budget is foreign aid, but there was a kind of hostility to nation building and world policing and those kinds of things that just Republican leadership didn't quite get. But now they get it, or they've been forced to get it. Does this actually make them a more formidable party in terms of electoral success?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's super popular to get the United States entangled in foreign conflicts in general elections. I actually don't necessarily think voters vote on national security issues, especially foreign policy ones, as much as folks here in Washington like to think. And, I think you could probably see that through supporting Ukraine. Like, there's a ton of reasons to support them in terms of our own national security and keeping alliances with our friends in Europe, including Ukraine. But I don't know that voters rewarded people who voted for Ukraine funding in the same way that they have a revulsion. Many of them have a revulsion for people who did vote for it, especially in GOP-based politics. I think that when you look at the incoming, these members get negatively. The folks who say and do things that are positive to Ukraine, you can tell that it attracts negative attention in the Republican Party now. Now, some people kind of shrug that off or balance it. Folks like Tom Tillis, who's definitely a Ukraine hawk, and he is careful about how he talks about it and careful about what he says, but he's trying to be consistent there. And people like him are pushing back in kind of these gentle ways. They say, well, no, it's not Ukraine who started the war with Russia. It was Russia. But there's not a ton of teeth behind that. And I think that's a big difference between this Trump administration and the last one 8 years ago, because not only did you have Republicans in Congress who would contradict and publicly break with the president pretty consistently. Folks like McCain, even Lindsey Graham, Mitch McConnell when he was the leader. But you also had people in the Trump administration who were kind of checks on President Trump's non-interventionist tendencies. People like James Mattis and beyond. That's all changed, you know. Even Marco Rubio, as you said, who would have obviously been a check on Trump in terms of ideology. He's not really serving that purpose right now. He's more interested in sort of implementing the Trump agenda and being simpatico with him. So you know, again, like the shift is pretty remarkable, and it's not even playing out in terms of an ugly fight anymore because it feels like the Trump wing of the party has just won and are kind of thumbing their nose at the old school hawks.
But looking at how the old school hawks are, is this, within there's the politics internally, but when we look at how we are positioned externally, is this weakening our position and will this weaken the United States overall?
I mean, look, it was a surprise to a lot of folks how the U.S. voted in that United Nations resolution earlier this week, siding with Russia against Ukraine and something on the Ukraine war. I think Democrats feel kind of lonely advocating for USAID, soft power, international development, and also funding Ukraine. So I do think when you look at our country's politics from the outside, from another country, we don't we don't look like we're on the same page. We look pretty divided, and that certainly doesn't help sell yourself to other countries when you're doing diplomacy. They see a United States that's divided pretty painfully on ideological lines on things like national security and foreign policy, whereas I feel like even 10 years ago there was a little bit more of a consensus among both parties to do so, and I do think that gave us more heft on the world stage.
Hmm. Burgess Everett, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Sure, thanks for your interest.